Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Super Coach Mates. Well, with the finals series upon us, I guess it is time for Thomas and I to take the plunge and finally work out who the heck is going to win this premiership and whatnot. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at each game as it comes, and we're just going to give our own thoughts and opinions on it, and then I'm going to do a little bit of background statistical analysis on the games and work out basically who should be winning the games according to the statistics that have been presented. So I'm joined by Thomas tonight. How are you, Thomas?
Yeah, not too bad. Nice to have a week off from footy and both our teams on our Mad Monday grind and players basically finding out if they've got a home for next year or not. But I guess we'll touch base on trade period and go into a lot more detail post finals. But I thought, what better way to continue kind of the momentum post Supercoach to go into a bit of a deep dive into finals. I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to the footy this weekend, considering there's only one game in Melbourne, which is it's a sellout, so it'll be a huge game Friday night. But before we go into how this is going to work, rather than kind of doing a massive, bumper hour-long episode on all four finals, we've decided to split it up. So we'll do the qualifying finals first, and then on Thursday we'll release the elimination final as it's close to the Friday night game, or the Thursday night games. Qualifying the finals on the Thursday night, so we'll release that first, and the elimination finals Friday night, so we'll release that later in the week for you guys to enjoy before the blockbuster Friday night game. But before we do that, so we've kind of had a bit of an interchange rotation. Instead of Nathan's Nags, because there is no super coach in the 2024 final series, we've released it with Nath's stats that matter. So we all know Nathan's love for statistical analysis. I think if he could work for Champion Data, he would do that in a heartbeat. But take it away, Nath. Obviously, you've got a few. We talked off fair about this, but you've obviously got a few stats that are very relevant to moving into grand final territory, but also a bit of a statistical analysis into kind of each team and how they kind of are shaping up for the first week of finals. And I think if you're a stats nerd and like your ins and outs of kind of the analytical part of the AFL, this next 10 minutes is not to be missed. So I'll leave it to you, Nathan, and take it away.
Thanks for the pressure. No. So what I have done is I've gone back through the archive. So for those of you who are a bit statistical analysis like I did, so the stats that matter. So there are 5 key stats that matter or that have been analysed on grand final day. So basically what I'm going to do is for each of the games, this is the analysis that I'm going to be looking at. So I'm going to be looking at each team's profile across these 5 key stats that I'm going to reveal now. And then the Champion Data Core 4 analysis, which is split into 4 different parts. Again, I will talk through each part. So the stats that matter. So from the last 11 premiers, and I will include last year's data as well. So 9 of the last 11 premiers so this is on grand final day. So 9 of the last 11 premiers on grand final day have won the contested possession differential. So last year it was dead even. It was 122 each. Only 7 of the 11, however, have won the raw clearance differential. So Brisbane won that by 6 last year. All 11 premiers have won the inside 50 differential, and Collingwood won that by 14 last year. Only 6 of the 11 teams have won the points from clearance differential, and Brisbane won this last year by a goal. And then all 11 premiers have won the scores from turnover differential, and Collingwood won this last year by 12. Although some people might include kick-ins as this. So if you include kickings, then it becomes 5. But Collingwood still won that stat. So they're the stats that matter on grand final day. So each of the teams for this week have been analysed using these 5 stats across the year. And then it's linked in with the champion data core 4 profile. So the reason why this is relevant is 10 of the last 11 premiers have ranked top 6 in 3 of the 4 groups. Ironically, the one team who didn't rank top 6 in 3 of the 4 was Collingwood last year. They only ranked top 6 in 2. So there's 4 main areas. So there's what you do with the football, there's what you do without the football, there's the scores from clearance differential, and then there's post-clearance contested possession differential, which is basically your ability as a team to win contests away from the stoppage. So they're the stats that basically I've gone through, done the research, and I'm going to present that to you with each team's sort of placing where they sit, how I think the games might look, based on these stats that I've presented to you. And the other thing I should point out too while I'm talking about this is that each team's turnover game has also been analysed. So this is basically just a straight differential of what they've scored from turnover versus what they've conceded on turnover. And it's relevant because I think 18 of the last 19 premiers have ranked top 3 in the turnover game. So people might say, oh, a pressure, the side a pressure puts on, or, the bottom 6 players of each side. But these are the stats that matter. And if your team is good at most of these stats, there is a very good chance that your team might be lifting up the Premiership Cup. So there were a few surprises when I was going through and getting all of the numbers. But again, I'll talk through them as we delve into each game. So whenever I talk about how games will look, this is what I'm referring to. So all of this stuff here that I've just gone through with all of you, that's what I'm going to be referring to when I talk about each game. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of an insight into how I view each game. And perhaps it might open up your eyes into sort of how some teams are going versus how other teams might be perhaps not doing as well. So it is interesting. Again, I've just referenced Collingwood and Brisbane last year, just rawly based off the grand final stats, just so that it makes sense when I'm talking about each team as well. Because, as I said, they are the stats that matter. And if your team wants to be lifting the Premiership Cup, they need to be good in most of these areas.
Yeah, for sure. Nice one, Nath. I mean, I guess if you're interested in that deep dive stuff, definitely take note of what Nath has to say. But also, I guess from a super coach perspective, moving into next year, if you do go into the nitty gritty statistical sort of stuff, that can really be beneficial in understanding how players work and kind of the understandings behind the game more so from, I mean, personally, I'm a little bit different to Nathan as I see a lot of it from what I see visually and the eye test and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, Nathan's brilliant in kind of behind the statistical analysis sort of footy aspect of it, which makes a completely different ball game when it comes to understanding footy and how a game is going. So that's something that we'll talk about as the finals go through.
I guess the one thing as well is that this doesn't lie. Because ultimately, if you don't have numbers to support what you're saying, as the people at Champion Data say, you are just a flog with an opinion. So I'm not a flog with an opinion because I have the numbers here that support what I'm saying. So if you don't have this stuff, then you basically are a flog with an opinion. So I have no doubt that Daniel Hoyne will go on and do some of this stuff when he talks about the finals and whatnot. But I'm just going to do it all for you now because he normally isn't on SC until tomorrow night. So you're sort of getting a bit of a head start.
Yeah, fair enough. And if we cop any abuse, I'll personally provide Nath's mobile number and you can have a chat with him about it. But moving on
Yes,
to
please do.
first finals game. So obviously I know that it's a bit confusing, I guess, if you're new to footy and whatnot with how it's listed, with second qualifying final being on Thursday night and the first qualifying final being on Saturday based on ladder positions and whatnot. But second qualifying final will be on Thursday night, so a bit of a treat for footy fans. Don't have to wait as long. I keep thinking the first game's on Friday night, but yeah, Thursday night it is. Port Adelaide versus Geelong. Big game. Probably not so much from a Victorian standpoint, considering it's in Adelaide, but we all know how Adelaide Oval like to rock the city once Port are in town. This will be a huge game over there. Massive home ground advantage for them. Having said that, I know I've just listed there the last time they played, I'm pretty sure it was round 9. Port just got over the top of the cap. I'm not sure if that was at GMHBA Stadium or if that was
yes,
in Adelaide.
it was.
Yeah, so
yes, it was at GMHBA.
Historically this season, the Cats haven't actually done as well as most people thought that they've been going to Alphabet Stadium. Considering they had the new renovation, everything, and thought, here we go, the Cats have got a juggernaut of a stadium and a fortress and whatever, but they just really haven't got it clicking in this season. But having said that, they're probably fortunate based off recent form to get into a qualifying final. My gut feeling here is I think, granted, Port do really well in finals when they've got a massive home ground advantage. You just have to look at that. I'm pretty sure it was the final against Richmond where they just pummeled them very, very quickly early days at Adelaide Oval. I'm not sure if it was them or it was the other way around, but I'm 90% sure it was Port that got a massive run on very quickly in that Adelaide Oval final. But they seem to do quite well when it comes to a final. Big game, big crowd. They've got that massive home ground advantage. But something tells me that the Cats might sneak over the top based off experience, based off kind of arrogance away from home, that they can play their style of footy and not be kind of overawed by the occasion of a hostile away crowd. What are your thoughts on this final based off face value?
Yeah, well, before I go into the stats on each game, based off face value, Geelong actually have a really, really, really good record against Port Adelaide. I think Geelong have only lost like 4 times from the last 16 that they've played. So this is a real bogey side for Port Adelaide. And the numbers here would actually say that this game is probably going to be a lot closer than perhaps what people are giving Geelong credit for. So if I just have a quick look, so Geelong have a better turnover game than Port Adelaide. They average more points from turnover. They've got a better without the football profile, so their defensive profile is better than Port Adelaide's. So I do give Geelong a massive chance of actually winning this game. And I feel like for Geelong, their best bet is to turn this into a turnover game. In saying that, though, Port Adelaide do have really good quick players, but I guess the other factor in this game, which we don't know yet, is the absence of Houston and Farrell and what that's going to do for Port Adelaide's game, because they provide so much run for them off that half-back line. So, yeah, as I said, so I think this game statistically is a lot closer than what people perhaps are giving Geelong credit for. In saying all of that, I do just think that the home crowd might be a factor in this. And I am going to lean slightly towards Port Adelaide. But I think it will be a great game. And whatnot. So, I'm leaning just towards Port Adelaide. But again, all the stats might say that Geelong perhaps are a much bigger chance than what people are giving them credit for.
Yeah, 100%. I think this is a genuine 50-50 contest, and I think it's a one game where potentially it's a team like Geelong that can nullify a home ground very effectively. Moving forward to, well, not this one, the key players of each side. This is something we'll do for all the finals. Kind of doing a head-to-head with three main key players for each team that really do have to stand up to give their side a chance of winning. The three players, in my opinion, we'll start with Port Adelaide, and I guess, Nath, you can go on a bit more of a statistical dive in with each team here. But Zachy Butters, Connor Rosie, Charlie Dixon, the numbers down the bottom of your screen there are relating to the season averages of that statistic. So, for example, Butters is 28.7 disposals isn't what he got last time. It was his season average, which basically all of them are, in that elite category or above average. But Butters and Rosie, I think that midfield duo is super, super important. Geelong have basically been ranked the lowest rated midfield for a while now this season. And I think, if they are going to capitalise anywhere, it's going to be that midfield. They get their first hands on the ball. They've got Jordan Sweet, who's been dominating the last couple of weeks and probably will go quite well against either of DeConning or Stanley in particular. They get their first hands on the ball. They get that forward. They probably means that they don't have to rely so heavily on the halfback distribution of Farrell and Houston. I have a feeling someone like a Jace Burgoyne might do that role. They could push something like Travis Boak back into halfback of a distribute. I'm not too sure. It is a pretty tricky situation for Port to be in, considering Farrell and Houston are the key contributors off halfback, and they present so much value when they push forward. And I guess it'd be interesting to see your opinion, Nathan, on who maybe plugs that hole. But I think Port maybe don't have to worry about it as much in this game if they can dominate the midfield, because if that ball doesn't get forward of centre in stoppage play, then they don't have to worry about it. They can just rely on Butters and Rosie to do their job. The third player in mind that I think really needs to have a strong game to give Port a chance, or to Port to win, is Charlie Dixon. He's been average at best this season. Injuries obviously costing him big time. And I think when Dixon isn't there, it's almost like a relief for opposition teams. I know that whenever St Kilda play Port, it's always a problem if Dixon's there, because you've got the likes of Georgiades and the other key forward who slipped my mind, Todd Marshall. So the trio is really dangerous, that three-pronged attack. And I think Dixon's at centre point. If he goes well, Port does well. And I think if he fires, then the likes of Rattigalia and DeConning and whoever else plays down there is going to really struggle to kind of try and nullify all three tools. But what are your thoughts, Nathan, on those key players for Port, and what's your kind of statistical look at on this Port outfit without Houston and Farrell in particular, because I guess they provide so much run-off halfback?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think you've actually missed the one player who I would have probably had first on this list. And that is this is going to hurt all the North Melbourne fans out there, but Jason Horne-Francis.
Yeah, he's one that's one.
I think this type of game is made for Jason Horne-Francis. I actually wouldn't be surprised if he ended up being the best player on the ground. He just looks built for finals. But in saying that, I think that I guess the one thing with finals is that you need your best players performing. I know some people say that finals are won by your bottom six, but it really isn't won by your bottom six. It's won by your best players doing their job and basically outplaying the opposition's best players. So if I'm Geelong, I think the one player who I would be having sleepless nights over is Jason Horne-Francis. I know he's not on this list, but I think Jason Horne-Francis has more damage than perhaps Butters and Rosie. And I don't know what Dixon's fitness is going to be like.
Yeah,
I don't think he's really played much football, and I just think he's perhaps near the end Big Charlie. But there's no doubt that he does provide a focal point for them. But yeah, I think that Butters is just going to do what Butters does. He just goes around, gets the ball, has his 30 disposals. Very inventive. Rosie, I don't know how Rosie's going to go. I think he's been injured the last few weeks, hasn't he, Rosie? He's been injured,
no,
or
he's played. I know he came back from injury.
I haven't really. I haven't
but
really
he
heard
hasn't.
much of him the
Yeah,
last few weeks, which is
he
normally
hasn't.
not a good sign.
Yeah, well, I was going to just
Um,
say he hasn't. Before you continue, he hasn't really, torn the house down. I know because I've been following quite closely, being an owner myself, super coach wise. I know historically he's gone through games where he's gotten 150, 160 ranking points and won it for them off his own boot. But he's one that's slowed down a little bit and probably struggled to find full dominating form off injury. But yeah, I think he's one that. Having said that, come finals, being the captain of that footy club, and how talented he can be off half forward or in the guts, I think he's a key cog in that midfield for sure.
yeah, and then there's Horn Francis, who I think is made for finals. So I think that they're going to be probably, especially Horn Francis, I think it's the one that's going to either make or break this game for Port Adelaide.
Yeah,
I feel like if he's hot, then Port Adelaide will run away with it. Well, if he's off, I think Geelong will give themselves a massive chance of going over there and winning.
yeah. With regards to, is there any statistics you want to reel off for Port, or are you going to talk about it more post Geelong after we talk about Geelong?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly go through their core four profile. I won't worry about the stats that matter for them. So Port Adelaide's core four profile. So the last 6 weeks they're ranked 6 overall. They're number 4 with the ball. They're number 7 without the ball. Number 3 scores from clearance differential, and then concerningly they're 16th for post clearance contested possession. So basically, to put that into laden terms, they're not really winning contest away from stoppage, which is a concern in finals because it does become more of a congested game. And perhaps this is why I'm giving Geelong a bit more of a chance than what people think is not purely based off that, but a lot of the uncontested play gets taken away in finals, and the contested play does slightly go up, not much, but it does go up. And then last 4 weeks, they're 4 for 4. Now, this is relevant because 10 of the last 11 premiers have only lost one of their last 4 games across the average. Ironically, again, the one outlier was Collingwood last year. They lost 2 of their final 4 games. So Collingwood sort of broke champion data last year. So 4 from 4 over the last 4 weeks is really good form. But when we get to Geelong, I'll talk about Geelong. But Geelong actually have a better core 4 profile than Port Adelaide over the last 6 weeks. So there is that to factor in as well. But yeah, I still will be leaning towards Port Adelaide. But again, when I go through the Geelong core 4 stuff, I'll say why they're better.
Yeah, no, 100%. Moving on to the Cats now. So these are some old heads, which I think are going to be really, really important come finals. They always seem to shine come finals, and it's probably the key difference against a lot of other teams is they've just got so much experience, grand final experience, elimination finals experiences. They're just so stacked, and they're almost a different side when it comes to finals. Not really prone to blowouts and shock losses. But yeah, 3 players I think, in my opinion, are key cogs in that. Best 22 is Maxi Holmes. Obviously, reinvented himself off halfback. He provides so much dash off that halfback that he's such a weapon for them. Not only carries the ball through halfback, but pushes up through the wing into half forward to kick it inside 50s. I think he's super dangerous. If Port can't stop him, I think he's going to rack up 30 and have a couple goals as well. He's kind of enabled Geelong to. The best way to probably put it is their game style almost looked a little bit ancient when they were struggling this season. Holmes put a stop to that, and I think being Geelong and the way they go about their footy with the kind of chip mark, glorified keepings off, if you will, Holmes has kind of added that manic pressure and free flow footy back into the Cats for sure. Dangerfield, I think, is also super, super important considering the weakness is Geelong's midfield essentially. And, having watched him live against St Kilda, I think he's one that just can still at his ripe old age, he can still dominate clearances, has the ability to just grab the ball and run straight forward. 5.3 clearances there on average this season, I think's immense for a guy his age. And the last person there on the list, Jeremy Cameron. I know Nathan was a little bit surprised. I mean, was not surprised, but he was surprised we didn't end up putting him in our side, in our All Australian side. But yeah, Cameron's a player that is built for finals. I think he's a player that is almost in hibernation in times of the season when cats are smacking up on teams. He's one that I think is going to be a really, really important player for them. There's no Hawkins, obviously. He's the main key forward there. If Port shut him out, I think they shut Geelong out. If he can get on a roll, and I think the benefit with Cameron is at the end of the day, he's so mobile. He's not a true stay-at-home forward. He's almost a Nick Riewoldt-esque centre-half forward where he can push so up on the ground, work on the wings. He's an excellent field kick, and he's one that definitely Port need to keep on tabs if they have any chance to win if they have a chance to win against the Cats, that's for sure. But what are your thoughts on those three? And are there any other players that stick to your mind that really need to show up on come Thursday, Nath?
Yeah, well, I think Dangerfield's the one. I think he is massive to Geelong's clearance game. That was the one area they massively fell away when he was not playing, was their ability to actually win clearance. And ever since he's come back, they've looked a completely different side. So the other interesting question, I guess, for Geelong is what do they do with Hawkins and Mitch Duncan? No, not Mitch Duncan. Sorry, Cam Guthrie.
Yep.
What do they do with those two? Do they just come straight back into that team, or do they or do they just have to unfortunately sit out because they're on the roll? And the last thing I think you want to really be doing in the final series is bringing in players who perhaps are underdone. And in the case of Hawkins, I'm not sure if he's the answer given that he's retiring. And as for Guthrie, well, it would be a Chris Scott thing to do, I think, to bring Guthrie in and have him go to Horn Francis as a tagger or Butters as a tagger, and just to get some fitness into him. But I guess then on the flip side, he's only played 10 games since the 2022 premiership for Geelong, so he hasn't had a lot of continuity. Guthrie. So yeah, I think if Port Adelaide can nullify Dangerfield and keep Jeremy Cameron reasonably quiet, I think that's going to be Port Adelaide's best chance of winning that. But if Dangerfield and Cameron get off the chain, I think Port Adelaide are in a little bit of trouble because, as I'm about to go through, I think that Geelong have the players to beat Port Adelaide. But just what I did with Port Adelaide real quick. So last 6 weeks, so Geelong are 5th overall. They're 7th with the football, so they're weaker than Port Adelaide with the ball. But they're 2nd without the football. So their defensive profile, as I touched on when we did the game earlier on, their defensive profile is much better than Port Adelaide's. And this is why I think they're a lot perhaps closer than what people are giving them credit for. They're 10th at raw clearance, scores from clearance differential. But again, as I said earlier on, it doesn't really matter that much come finals and grand final day because normally it's the turnover game that wins. And then post clearance, they're 7th. So again, they're much better than Port Adelaide in that area. So that's why I said a lot of the stats would actually say that perhaps Geelong are a lot closer, perhaps even should be winning this game. But I just think the Adelaide Oval factor will play its hand, which is why I will be leaning towards Port Adelaide. But again, give Geelong a massive chance, got a really good record against Port Adelaide. But as I said, I think I touched on this earlier or one of our earlier podcasts. I think this is Port Adelaide's best chance of making a grand final under Ken Hinkley since he took over. So they just have to get this job done, Port Adelaide, get themselves into a home prelim and go from there.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think this is a time for Ken. He's done so well to kind of galvanise the group and come back into a home final. This is probably the one chance he really needs to solidify himself as a great coach and send him straight through to a granny if they can get there. But Moving on to this first qualifying final on Saturday Arvo. This is, you look at the way this game is going to be played. It's a surprise that they're playing Saturday Arvo, but I guess it's a very good slot for Sydney fans, I guess. But yeah, Sydney top of the table versus GWS, who are really hot form in the last month of footy. Last time they played, Sydney 102 defeated GWS 75. So obviously Swans got on top of them, but the Giants have looked a different team with Jesse Hogan on form. I think this will be, if not match of the round, closeness-wise, I think this is a genuine 50-50 split, regardless of the home factor. It is an interesting conversation to have, I guess, if the tables turn and GWS were higher up in the ladder. I know we talked about, grounds for home finals and things like that, Nathan, in our previous podcast. And it'd be interesting to see if GWS were ahead of Sydney and they played as the home team. Do they play at Energy Stadium where they only get 15,000 capacity? That'd be an interesting conversation to have. But I guess we don't have to worry about it, considering it's going to be at the SCG. I think here we'll talk about it later, but it's one of those games that's going to be brutal. I think it's going to be real hot contested footy. I think there's going to be, potentially a fair few injuries out of this game just with the way both teams play. Both teams are super, super contested. You have your youngsters in Warner and Co and Goulden, Heaney in the midfield versus your Cornelio, your Josh Kellys, your Tom Greens. It's a super, super contest to be made. What's your thoughts on this, and who do you think is going to win? Off your initial thoughts, Nath?
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there. I'm
really?
going to be honest. I'm going to disagree. I'm actually surprised the Giants are even in fourth place, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, fair enough.
So again, this is sometimes where the eye and the numbers can actually be different. So people might say the Giants are playing well. They've won 3 of their last 4 games. But a lot of the underlying numbers are actually quite poor for the Giants. I think Sydney will win this game quite comfortably. If I just go through quickly the stats that matter. So Sydney score way more points from turnover. They average more inside 50s by quite a distance. The only areas where they don't really have the Giants is in the contest and the clearance game. But I think Sydney are happy to sacrifice that to be really potent on the turnover game, which, as I said earlier, 18 of the last 19 premiers have ranked top 3 in the turnover game. Right now, they are sitting 3rd in that turnover game. This has all the hallmarks of a Sydney win. Perhaps even if I was looking at betting on this game, of course, gamble responsibly, I would even consider taking Sydney at the line, so to win by more than whatever they're projected to win by, because I just think that the Swans are that far ahead of where the Giants are right now, that if both of these sides turn up, the Swans should be winning this game quite comfortably.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from. I guess GWS are one of those sides where they only need a kind of 3-week, 4-week span to dominate. They're not really a side that have dominated all season, similar to, contrastingly to Sydney, where albeit Sydney probably had a few games where they really suffered because of injury more so than form. But the Giants really only need a sniff and they're in it. So it'd be definitely an intriguing match for sure. But moving on to the key players.
I will just point out as well, the only caveat on that is that the Swans and the Giants have played 3 times in finals, and the Giants have actually won all 3 of them, including in 2016 when they were in the exact same position. The only difference this time is that I believe all 3 of those finals have been played at the Sydney Olympic Stadium. Whereas this one is going to be played at the SCG, which I think will tip it in towards Sydney. Well, at least 2 of them have. I'm not sure about the third one. I have a feeling there might have been one that was played at the SCG, but I know 2 of the 3 have been. So that is another factor to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, for sure. Moving on to the key players for the Swannies, two of which are all Australian Blazers there, in Nick Blake and Errol Gould. I think the key for the Swannies there, rather than the contested sort of stuff which the Giants do incredibly well in, led by Tommy Green, I think Nick Blakey and Errol Gould in particular are the two that, one off half back and one in the wings moving forward. Their pace is potentially going to be a serious problem for the Giants. You've got Toby Bedford, who probably does a role in Errol Gould anyway. I think their pace is going to be a concern for the Giants. I think the Giants at times can look quite sluggish. That's probably where they shoot themselves in the foot a little bit. They get a lot of the ball around the ground, but just don't move it as effectively. But yeah, Sydney have got two of the best ball movers in the AFL in Gould and Blakey to really do some damage there, which I think if they don't get shut down, they're going to have a field day out there on the SCG turf. And Grundy, I think he's had an underrated season. He wasn't in our All-Australian calculations, unfortunately, but he's come back with a vengeance from his stint in the D's and the Pies. And I think if Briggs is not careful and doesn't do his homework, Grundy could seriously dominate. He's a play that, similar to Cameron, has his down days, and, he's almost in hibernation, it feels like, in parts of the season with Grundy. If he gets on top of Briggs, he'll play. He could be the best player for the Swans on game day. I think he's super, super important to the way they move the ball. He acts as another midfield around clearances. You just look at that stat there, 11.1 handballs is in the elite category for Ruckman. His clearances helps immensely. He's in that Rowan Marshall kind of factor where he's, as I said, he's around the ground more often than not. And I think as long as Grundy, I know he's got a history of giving stupid frees away when he gets frustrated. If he can contain Briggs, I think he's a big reason why the Swans will win this. And if you're right in saying quite comfortably, I wouldn't be surprised if it is quite comfortably if Grundy gets on top of Briggs very early in the game. That's for sure. What are your thoughts on it, Nath?
Yeah, well, I mean, you could probably put in most of the Sydney lineup, to be honest, as the key players. I definitely think these are three. You could put Heaney in, you could put Warner in, you could put Papley in if he's back. You could put in James Rowbottom, who's very underrated. So, I mean, their Swans are just stacked with players. I do think that this game is going to be one off what's done the turnover, so like most of these finals. So this is where I think Sydney can really exploit the Giants as the game wears on. So yes, Blakey, I do like Blakey. Personally myself, I thought his All-Australian perhaps was a little bit surprising, but it was hard to ignore what he did, especially at the start of the year. Gordon, I think, deserved it, and Grundy, I'm still surprised that Grundy didn't make the squad, but I can understand why.
Yeah.
But I don't think there were really any surprises that all four of those Sydney players got in the three midfielders and Blakey. They've just been phenomenal all year, especially those three the midfielders. So just having a look at the Sydney profile. So as I said, they're third in the turnover game. 18 of the last 19 premiers have been top three. So last 6 weeks, they've got the third best profile. The number one with the football. And this is when we get to the Giants. I think this is why it's going to be a lot more of a blowout. So number one with the football. Number 5 without the football. Number 1, it scores from clearance, and number 15 at post-clearance contest. So again, like Port Adelaide, they're not winning contests around the ground, which perhaps is a concern. And they have won 3 of their last 4 games, but I did just note down as well that I don't think they've been against any of the finalists. I think their last win against the finalists was probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago. 5 or 6 weeks ago. So it doesn't, to me, it doesn't really matter who you play coming into finals. It's more how you're playing. And the last 6 weeks, again, outside of what they're doing at contest around the ground, is very, very strong. So I think Sydney are a massive chance. I think Sydney should be winning this game quite comfortably.
Yeah, no, I understand. Well, I guess when you look at the facts, the stats that way, they are, as you said, stats don't lie. So, yeah, it'd be definitely an intriguing contest. But before we wrap up tonight's episode on the qualifying finals, just moving on to the Giants. So they're an enigma in themselves. Two of the three as well, all Australian Blazers, or all Australian accredited for 2024. Lockie Whitfield. Had a very underrated season. I think from a super coach perspective, he was on my every game list with his body essentially being made of tissue paper, which was super
Who's a
frustrating.
walking hospital bed?
Yeah, walking hospital, whatever you want to say. But 508.1 meters gained average. He's been so important for their dash off halfback. Sometimes it looks like he's just getting the cheap shit around the back of the D50, but yeah, he runs all day. He's impossible to tag to some degree because he just runs off his feet, or runs his opponent off his feet, which is super important for the Giants and the transition between kind of D50 to the midfield. Tommy Green, I guess from a super coach perspective, was a bit frustrating this season with his disposal efficiency, as he always is, really. But 30.7 disposal average in the elite category. He'll be a big reason if the Giants win. I reckon he'll have a huge game. He's super hard to tag. Having said that, the Swans do have James Jordan and Rowbottom who can do a job on him. I think if they nullify him, it's going to be a hard day for him and a hard day for Giants midfielders alike. And Jesse Hogan, obviously the Coleman medalist, All-Australian full forward. He's just been super dominant in the last month of footy, averaging 3 goals a game. Super coach wise, I think it was since round 18, 19, he didn't went under 100. Something ridiculous like that. I don't know where I heard it from. Nath, you might know yourself, but I did hear something I don't know if it was a podcast or a clip off an interview, that the difference between, say, a Curnow and a Mackay compared to a Hogan is Curnow is your traditional stay-at-home forward and whatnot, but Hogan, essentially with what I mean by those Blues forwards, even though they do move up the ground, it's the Blues' end target to goal. So their end target is to kick it to Curnow and Mackay. They're the ones that are translating through goal. Whereas Hogan acted almost as a centerpiece for the Giants forward of 50, where they were looking for Hogan at all occasions. We get those contested marks. The goals were kind of secondary because of his work rate to get behind his man and push forward and create that mismatch. But Hogan was that key cog moving forward, where essentially all the ball went through him. He was a key instigator in that forward 50 dominance. Is there anyone else that I'm missing on, Nath? I think there's a few players you could probably throw in there, like Sammy Taylor down back. And how do they statistically match up against the Swans?
Yeah, well, I actually think the most important player in this game is actually Jesse Hogan. And that's purely because Adam Kingsley is actually manipulating Jesse Hogan and sending Hogan to who he wants to play on, rather than the other way around, which is normally who the defensive team want to put on to Hogan. So they are basically manipulating that matchup. It got really badly exploited in the Fremantle game. Fremantle wanted Brendan Cox on him, but Hogan kept on going to someone else, and it's literally just a straight out of the goal square, and then it basically creates chaos, and Hogan gets the matchup that he wants, rather than the defensive team getting the matchup that they want for Hogan. So, if Hogan can do that and can kick a bag, that is going to be the Giants' best avenue. In saying that, though, key forwards historically don't do well in finals matches. We just sort of have to look back to last year's grand final in particular, where outside of Joe Danaher, basically no key forward scored any goals. It was all the smaller players and the midfielders who did a lot of the damage for both sides. So that brings guys like Brett Daniels, Toby Green, Bedford, all of those guys into this game.
Yeah.
So just based off their last sort of 6 week thing. So across the year, they've actually got, so out of the finalists, they've actually got the second worst turnover game. So they're not a good turnover game, which again might be surprising to a lot of people because they're billed as this, really strong team from halfback. They get the tsunami going. They get run and gun. But their turnover game, as I said, is the second weakest among all of the finalists left. Their overall rating across the last 6 weeks, so they're 6th overall across the last 6 weeks, which does still put them in that sort of, the top 6 bracket. But when you dig a little bit deeper, there is concern. So they're 10th with the football, they're 10th without the football. They're 7th at scoring from clearance, and they're 3rd at winning contests around the ground. So the only asset that they really have to throw at Sydney is what they're doing at contest around the ground. But otherwise, the Giants do not really stack up well against the Swans in any aspect. In fact, in my opinion, outside of Carlton, they're probably actually the worst side in the finals at the minute. So that's saying a lot about where I think the Giants are sitting right now. I think a lot of those games they've won, there was a couple of games where, in particular, I think it was maybe the Essendon game. I think they played Essendon not long ago and they won, but they won that game purely off accuracy. They didn't actually win on expected scores. They only won because I think it was maybe 3 of their 4 games in a 4-week block where they won purely off accuracy. And they actually lost all 4 games on expected scoring, which I think has masked a lot of people's opinions on the Giants. But I just think that if Sydney get their turnover game going, the Giants are going to get blown off the park, especially because defensively they're not standing up to what opposition sides have been putting at them over the last 6 weeks. So I think the Swans should win this game. If I had to pick a margin, I would say probably 4 to 5 goals.
That's understandable. I think you nailed it on the head there. With the fact that
that's just my thoughts.
Well, I mean, you're 100% right with regards to the defensive worries. That was their big concern when they were faltering in games. Was their attack was great, their midfield was amazing at times. I mean, they're at best times they looked average, but overall they had quite a strong midfield. But defensively they just really weren't stacking up. They were leaking goals left, right, centre. Even when we played them back in early round, I think it was in that first 8 rounds of footy, we managed to come back really quickly in that last quarter and almost snatch the win. So you can see there where, especially if the Giants do get ahead in that game, I could see Sydney easily piling goals back on. But that's all we got time for today. So as I said, we'll release our elimination finals thoughts in those 2 games later in the week on the Thursday. But hopefully if you're one of the supporters of either of these 4 teams, I guess the benefit of, if you do lose, you get another chance. And I think that's the beauty of qualifying for those qualifying finals. You don't have to worry about getting knocked out in the first week. And if you do lose, you can regroup and go again. And traditionally speaking, a lot of grand finalists end up through the qualifying finals. And if you are a winner, especially if you are listening interstate and are one of the fans that go for Sydney or Port, you do win that first qualifying final. You got almost a ticket to the grand final because having a home ground advantage in a prelim final is massive. So hopefully,
I should have pointed this out before. I will just point out as well that Sydney supporters can book your prelim tickets because no side since 2000, no side who's finished on top of the ladder has gone out in straight sets. So Sydney Swans fans, book your prelim tickets. And interestingly, I don't know if this is a weird quirk or whatnot, but no team from 4th has actually won the premiership since 2000. So
there you go. Geelong's fucked if that's the case. Oh no, GWS are fucked if that's the case.
So I don't know how they've only made the grand final, I think 3 times in that time period as well. So finishing 4th seems to be the bogey spot. Don't know why. But Swans fans, book your prelim tickets. Giants fans, you're probably not going to win it. Just putting it out there.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, again, if Sydney fans do request a refund come 2 weeks' time, we've got Nath's number on speed dial. So Yeah, you can talk directly to him if you want to refund for your prelim final tickets. But other than that, we'll catch you for the elimination finals review on Thursday with 2 massive blockbusters to come.